with the all-African government, will be coughing out, as I said earlier, $74 billion in debt service payments in the current year alone. And that's according to Dr. Achonu, the president of the AFDB group, who was speaking at the just concluded World Bank IMF Spring meetings. On Monday next week, a two-day summit of African heads of state and finance ministers will open in Nairobi to discuss the ambitious financing replenishment of IDA resources, especially for Africa, vis-a-vis the continent's rising debt levels. Let's get a sneak preview and some outlook on the IDA 21 summit now from my guest at our Abuja studios. Stanley Achonu is the Nigerian director at the One campaign and is standing by. We thank you for your time tonight on the show. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Tell me about the IDA Replenishment Program of the World Bank, especially for Africa. How much do we know?
This year, the World Bank and donor countries will be getting together, and borrower countries as well will be getting together to replenish the IDA. It's the International Development Association. The name is funny, but it's the low-income fund that the bank makes available to the poorest countries and low-income and middle-income countries. Is the cheapest source of financing for countries. It's concessional, it's grants, is a mix of grant and loans to countries that need it. It gives borrower countries an opportunity to set their priorities and contribute to the ideas of what they want to spend the money on. So this is an important process that we're going through. You've spoken about how much in debt repayment that African countries will be making this year. Because a mix of borrowing from capital markets, which is more expensive, or very expensive source of financing for African countries, is contributing to that huge debt profile. But borrowing from sources like IDA is concessional, is cheap, it has long-term duration, its interest rate is very minimal, it has windows for sort of break in between if there are crises in countries. So this is an important process for African countries who constitute the largest set of borrowers from this fund.
But well said. But of course, we all know that a debt is a debt, whether there's a moratorium, whether it's coming at zero interest. A debt is a debt. So who goes a borrowing goes a sorrowing, as the saying goes. But let's look into next week's event. By the way, what should be the key priorities for African heads of state and their finance chiefs at next week's summit?
Very critical. The donor countries are tightening their belts. The money is not as freely available as it used to be. So those who are in need, the African heads of state especially, have to up their game in campaigning for these donors to put in more money. So and that ability or the signaling will start from the meeting in Nairobi next week. The heads of state will gather with the finance ministers to talk about how they intend to appeal to donor countries to contribute. That's on one side. On the other side is that they also have to show clear commitment on how they want to spend the money over the next 3 years, because this replenishment will last for 3 years. And we're hoping that it will be more ambitious than the last one. We're targeting at least $30 billion from donor countries so that the bank and the fund can leverage up to over $100 billion over the next 3 years to the low-income countries. So they have to be very clear about how they appeal to the donors, but they also have to be very clear about how they intend to use the money. There has been a lot of questions around transparency and accountability, and a group of civil society organizations have put together an 8-point agenda for the heads of state in a memo that we have tomorrow we'll be distributing to the heads of state, and we have clearly outlined what the heads of state should be doing in Nairobi, including building accountability mechanisms that put citizens at the center of the utilization of this grant. Like you said, it is debt, it has to be paid. So those who will bear the brunt of the repayment must be at the center of the decision making, and that is key priority for us as civil society organizations, asking the heads of state to commit to transparent and open use of these funds in the next phase. But there's also the question about what exactly would you be investing? The African heads of state will have to outline their areas of focus in job creation, in climate financing, in healthcare, in education. Where would this money go to? So these are some of the things we expect them to hash out during the summit in Nairobi.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting. Stanley, what is the outlook from your organization, the One Campaign, when it comes to campaigning for responsible fiscal responsibility, responsible development, finance acquisition with countries? If you look at Nigeria, you look at some other African countries where donor money is disappearing in a manner of speaking without really touching the bottom of the pyramid in terms of development, in terms of poverty alleviation, in terms of whether you are even giving palliatives to the people. So it becomes very worrying whether African leaders should be encouraged to borrow more at whatever rate moratorium repayment program for behalf of the people of the continent.
Obviously, you can't say do not borrow. There is no two ways about it. Government needs to be financed. So there are two things we're saying. One, you need to be financed through cheap loans, and either presents that cheap loan versus going to Eurobond. Countries like Kenya will struggle to sort of roll over their $2 billion Eurobond. So that is a very difficult place for poor countries to go to. But on the question of, since we're going to borrow anyway, I think we should, for our priorities, what are we spending the money on? What should the money go towards? And that is what we're saying, give agency, give voice to the citizens who you are borrowing on their behalf. And that's on one side. So the other side of this equation is in what way should citizens decide on what the money should be invested in? You've mentioned poverty alleviation programs, which we're very concerned about. We talk about healthcare, immunization, vaccination, primary healthcare service, primary education, making primary education available to citizens. Those are key areas. Investing in green jobs, in climate adaptation. Those are key areas that the African heads of state must clearly outline the approach they want to use. It's not just because they've done this over the years. Part of Nigeria's debt at the moment is against doing things like conditional cash transfer, poverty alleviation programs over the last 10 years. We have seen in recent times all of the scandal that has come out of management of these resources. So this is why we think that while we ask that the money be made available, while we cannot help but say, look, you have to borrow to find the cheap financing, we're also saying that now is the time to sort of take serious your transparency and accountability futures. And we're not the only ones concerned. It's not only civil society on the African continent that are concerned. The donors are also very concerned about how this money is being utilized. And so they are pressing also that borrowers must show more commitment to transparency and accountability, aside from the specific investment they intend to make with this money.
Okay, so we're expecting the One Campaign and the rest of your team and others to make a very big show, a big splash next week, 28 and 29 in Nairobi.
Yes. We will start our conversation with the ministers who will be drafting the communique for the heads of state. So as soon as we get to Nairobi, our first set of work with our partners, cut across multiple civil society organizations on the continent, will focus on sort of getting the ministers aligned, or at least agreeing to some of the things we've listed in our 8-point memo to the heads of state, and making sure that the language and our expectations are carried into the heads of state summit, where some select civil society would also be addressing those heads of states.
That'll be an interesting thing. We're covering that here on Arise News. Thank you so much. We appreciate chatting with you on the program tonight as we look forward to that impactful IDA 21 summit starting in Nairobi. Stanley Achonu, Nigeria Director at the One Campaign in Abuja.